Well, hello. We're back with more of my A to Z reading challenge. This is part 2. This is going to be another 6 books in this video, which will bring us to the halfway point of the challenge. So it covers the letters H through to M, I believe, is the correct thing. Let's go with it and hope I'm right. But yeah, it's been a couple of days since I finished Galapagos and posted the first video. It's the 21st of March today. I'm probably not going to keep up with just saying what the date is all the time. I don't know, we'll see. I don't think anyone really is that bothered. But we can jump right back into the challenge now and talk about my book for H. Well, talk about my first half of the book for H. Because I've been reading Hogfather by Terry Pratchett, an author I've wanted to get into for my whole life. I always knew he was one I really wanted to try and one I thought I'd really get along with. My friend Morgan was telling me about one of the books a couple of weeks ago. Just like a joke he makes in it. I'm like, oh, that's my sense of humour. I think I'd really get on with that. So he was in the forefront of my mind when I was kind of coming up with a list of books for this challenge. And, you know, I think this is a pretty damn popular one in his Discworld series. I think it's the 20th book in like a 41 book series. Obviously, sadly, he never got to finish it in the way he would have intended because he did pass away. But I think kind of each book sort of can stand on its own, but also there's probably a benefit to reading the entire thing. And I think some characters are going to cross over, and it kind of splits into like mini-series within the larger Discworld series, I think. All that kind of business. But this one is one I see a lot of people talk about. A lot of people will just read this around Christmas time and stuff. So naturally I'm going to read it in March. You know, I'm either late or early to read it for last or next Christmas, depending on your point of view. So, you know, pick whichever one you fancy. Also, how nice is that cover? I remember like all the adverts in like 2007, 2006 sort of time for the adaptation of it they did around Christmas time, obviously, with David Jason and all that. So it's been in my conscience for a long time now, because 2007 was nearly 20 years ago. That is disgusting. I'm not even going to think about that because I'll have a crisis. So yeah, I've been meaning to read this for a while. I've reached the halfway point now, so I'm going to check in. I'm on page 233. I do have a bookmark in there because I do want to, if I remember, demonstrate something a bit later on that I want to talk about. I'm really, really enjoying this though. I think this could easily be one of my favourite things I've read so far if it keeps up with this first half. I don't know how it's going to carry on from the 200 pages. We'll have to see. I mean, I suppose there are a lot of what I feel like are distractions in this one, and even the characters themselves get distracted, and that will take up like 5 or 6 pages sometimes to actually get the plot moving again. So maybe just more of those kind of shenanigans are going to, fill out the book a bit. But the basic premise of this one is there are a group of people, I'm assuming maybe recurring villains in Discworld as a whole, called the Auditors. They hire an assassin called Mr. Tea Time, or Tia Time or something like that. He wants to pronounce it differently, but it's written Tea Time. And he's absolutely insane, and I love him. They hire him to kill the Hogfather, who is in the realm of Discworld, the Discworld universe. He's the equivalent of Father Christmas or Santa Claus. And they want him gone for reasons as yet unexplained as far as I'm reading. But he has gone missing. And Death, who's a character in Discworld, just casually Death, he, or they, I don't know actually, they have kind of taken over the Hogfather role, and they're pretending to be Hogfather to keep like people believing in Hogfather, again for reasons that I don't think have been explained to me yet, unless I've just missed something glaringly obvious. So he's covering for Hogfather with all of his little minions that are helping him out, and then his granddaughter Susan, who's, I guess you could argue she's the main character. It's kind of split pretty evenly between her and Death, I would say, as like the main characters in this. She's decided to investigate what's happened to Hogfather and try and find him and save the day, I guess. So I'm excited to find out exactly why, they wanted Hogfather gone and everything like that. But I'm really liking this a lot. The characters are great. The tone in particular is great. The writing is great. I really get on with it for the most part. It's very funny. It's more adult than I was expecting. Like, there's swearing in this. There's like really crude and sexual humor in this. Like, they mention like sexual diseases a surprising amount. So that really surprised me. I thought this was kind of catered to a much younger audience than I'm assuming it actually is. So that was a pleasant surprise, actually. The world building is great as well. Even like 20, 30 pages in, I was like, I'm really enjoying just being in this world, and I'm still really enjoying it. This is definitely giving me that itch to read the rest of the Discworld series, which would be one hell of a project if I tried to embark on that, so maybe stay tuned. But yeah, everything in regards to the fundamentals of the book, I'm really, really enjoying. And it's just, yeah, I'm having a real great time just being in this world. There's so many little ideas that Terry Pratchett just throws in that to do a Marge Simpson, I just think they're neat. And they could probably just be like whole like novellas or full-on books on their own, some of the ideas that he has, and just the way he describes things is really interesting. And the idea of like gods, and is Hogfather actually a god because, you know, you leave him offerings and he rewards you for believing in him, and you know, what other gods are there in the universe of Discworld, and like the invention of gods as well, which seems to be happening. Like these gods are just, people think of a god and they seem to just be appearing in the world out of nowhere. And one of my favourite examples so far that I've encountered, again, just these little ideas that I think are really fun, is the god of hangovers. And but they call him the god of hangovers because when you get a hangover you're like, oh god. And I just think that's so funny. And whenever he has a line, like he's written as like the god says, and you know, it's that kind of humour that really, really works. And I'm enjoying that a bunch. And another thing I really enjoyed, just his descriptions of things. I can't remember what he's describing. It might be one of the pigs that's like pulling the sleigh. They're kind of saying the idea of they can't fly, but they can change where ground level is for them. And like, I just think that's such a really fun way of describing that. So there's just loads of little things like that he just throws in and gives you an existential crisis. You're like, oh my god, you're right, I've never thought about that. But it's just like a throwaway line. It's not even a thing. And like sometimes a throwaway line will just become a plot point, like later on. You think he's just telling a joke, and then it becomes like an actual plot. So really clever stuff, you know. It throws a lot at you. It's still throwing a lot at me. There's a lot of characters in this. I'm going to argue too many characters. That may just come from, and I need to give the book some benefit of the doubt regarding this, because this is the 20th book in the series. It's had 19 books to introduce other characters and locations and, you know, world building stuff before this that maybe I just absolutely needed to know, or maybe not, jumping into this one. Because there's like some characters in this I'm like, I don't really know why you're here, and I feel like you're just kind of wasting time and padding this out. But I'm also assuming they're probably recurring characters that are featured in previous novels, so if you have that pre-existing attachment to it, you wouldn't have that problem with the book. So I need to give it the benefit of the doubt until I read some other Discworld ones, like earlier ones at least. Because there's a whole plot with a lot of characters that I think it's called the Unseen University. I don't really care about what's going on there. Susan's just arrived there at this point to like advance the plot. But we've had loads of scenes of them just like playing around with the bathroom. And I was like, I don't really see the point in this. Maybe it will go somewhere. Obviously, there's still half the book to go. But everything in that university, whenever it kind of cuts back to that, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of... Can we go back to something more interesting, please? So I guess we'll have to wait and see what my feelings about that ultimately are. But I do think they're throwing way too many characters at you in this. Because I am kind of struggling to follow that sometimes. I mean, there's loads of groups of characters, and like even just taking one or two characters out of each of the groups I think would have improved things a bit. You know, it feels a bit like Avengers Endgame in a way, where, you know, it's nice to see everyone all in the same place, but a lot of them just kind of have to stand there and look pretty, and maybe they'll get one line every now and again as they run past the camera. So maybe it's that kind of deal, I don't know. But I can't really hold that against the book, because that's kind of a fault of mine for jumping into the 20th book in the series. So it might be a legit criticism, but I can't actually say that for sure. I think the only detraction so far for me, and I think it is, you know, just a writing style that you like or you don't. There's a lot of times where, you know, there'll be like an asterisk next to something, and at the bottom of the page, you know, they'll just make a little note on something. And it's still like within the context of the novel, and it's like, you know, it might just add a bit of backstory or context to what the character said or a concept that's been introduced, which is all very well and good. But for me, just as I'm reading it, to see that and like have to jump down to the bottom of the page then and read something, go back up and find my place again, and sometimes it's in the middle of a sentence and like kind of lost my place a bit. It feels a bit unnecessary to just do that and add those little notes to the bottom. Like you could easily just paste them into the actual text and it would be fine. So that feels a bit unnecessary to me, particularly this example where the asterisk explanation at the bottom lasts so long it has to continue onto the next page, and they put like a line there so you can like carry on reading it. And for me, that's just not an enjoyable reading experience to be going through this, then having to read to the bottom of the page, and then go back to carry on. You know, there's been a couple of examples like that, and that's not enjoyable for me to read. Maybe there's an audiobook of this, and I'd be interested to see how they handled those little like cutaway sections in the audiobook. But yeah, that's just one stylistic choice that I'm not gelling with. Some of them are okay when they're like brief, and you know they are normally quite humorous, but the book is humorous, so just throw those in there. Other than that, I'm still really, really liking this. Very funny. I think my biggest laugh so far, and I did laugh out loud, was these auditors. It's such a nerdy comparison to kind of explain this with, but they have the very kind of a similar idea of the Dark Knight trilogy. Hear me out. The concept that, you know, Batman can be anyone. Batman is a symbol. And you can kill a man, but you can't kill the symbol. You know, any man can be Batman, you can kill any man. But, you know, the idea of Batman will always live on, you can't kill an idea. They very much subscribe to that theory because they're striving for immortality, and they believe that they always talk as like we or us, they speak as like a collective, because they think individualism makes you a creature that has a beginning and an end if you kind of just make yourself as an individual and like paint yourself as that. So there's one moment where one of them accidentally calls themselves I and just says I think this, I think that, and then they go, oh bugger, and they just die. And it's that kind of dark humour that really, really tickles me, and I'm really liking that. Certainly the tone and everything of this is very, very fun. So we'll see how it continues on. I think there is a slight danger that it's going to end up being a bit too long for my taste, because there's just a lot of distractions. There's a lot of characters just kind of pissing about, not really advancing the plot at all. And we haven't seen, as I'm reading, Mr. Tea Time and his assassins in ages. So I'm hoping we pick back up with them soon. So, you know, it kind of does meander a bit, but maybe that's just filling out the world that people who've read the first 19 before this would really, really love and would get something out of, and I'm just not getting that. So, you know, it's hard to really judge how I'm ultimately going to feel about this, even once I've finished it, until I maybe read some more Discworld books. But I can see why this is so beloved. I can see why people really love the Discworld series. I'm having an absolute blast. I can't wait to finish it. But I also don't want to finish it, in a way. Not just because I don't have any more books purchased yet to read to carry on with the challenge, but because I'm just really liking existing in this world and being thrown into it. Very cool story so far. And yeah, I'll check back in when I finished it. Okay, we are checking back in. About 3 minutes ago, I finished reading Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. I really enjoyed this. I'd give it a 4 stars, a very, very solid 4 stars. I think if I read Discworld from like the start and then get back up to this point, in case there are like more recurring characters and stuff that do feature in this. I know like Death is, you know, in more books than just this one. I don't know if it goes beyond that, but I'm also thinking like the side characters at the university and stuff that I was talking about before. If they show up prior to this book, and we're like familiar with that place and those people a bit more, I could see myself rereading this when the time is right to reread it, having made my way through the series and bumping this up to 4.5. Because I think I'd just get more out of it if I was familiar with that side of, you know, the Discworld world. All the stuff at the university, which was kind of my least favourite part. It did sort of win me round by the end. I was enjoying it. I do think a lot of the sections with those characters, though, was just kind of needless and quite plodding. And yeah, it just padded out the book unnecessarily. I feel it did get to a good point eventually. It did win me over, and I was kind of enjoying the sequences set there. And there was ultimately sort of a point to it, which I liked, and I really enjoyed the messages of the book about what makes us human and the importance of belief. I do think Mr. Tea Time and his assassins were sadly underused for me. I would have liked a lot more of him. It is what it is. My favourite character ultimately I think was Death. I really enjoyed them. I am excited to learn more about the world, and kind of see what happens with that. Because I think that will also allow me to appreciate some of these scenes a bit more, some of the sequences in this. Because again, it's like, I just don't feel like we need this. There's like a whole little subplot as well with, Death as the Hogfather steals a feast from a restaurant, I think, to give to the homeless. And then we just have like, I would say too many pages dedicated to the restaurant and then trying to just sort that out, and I feel like we just didn't need to see it. There's a few moments like that I don't know if that's just like a quirky Discworld thing, that we see lots of little consequences like that you wouldn't otherwise see, which I can appreciate in a sense, but it also just feels like padding to me right now. And the book actually ends on one of those kind of like sequences, and I'm like, oh. I wanted the ending to kind of hit me. I feel like it should have ended with the scene before the one it ended with. I do think maybe it's just a case of sometimes the jokes just didn't quite land for me, or I feel like some of the jokes just went on too long, and you're like, okay, we get it. So I think it's a few moments like that where maybe it should have been reined in a little bit. But for the most part, as I talked about when I last checked in, the humour really works for me in this. I think I'm going to really enjoy Terry Pratchett and all his other Discworld novels. The characters were great. The tone of the book I really enjoyed. It felt cozy, but also there were lots of stakes to it. I really enjoyed like the mysteries of what was going on, why the auditors wanted the Hogfather dead, why Death was covering for that, and his reasons for that. It does get explained, and I think it's a really satisfying explanation when we get it. I wish we got answers sooner. I wish it kind of just explains everything right at the end, and I feel like we should have maybe paced out the reveals. Because I didn't want to spend 90% of the book being completely confused by what was going on, and I did. And I think I would have appreciated maybe being drip-fed a few more reveals a bit earlier than just getting info dumped with everything right at the end to make it all make sense. I think I would have maybe enjoyed the ride a little bit more. But we did get those answers, which is the important thing. And, it was a surprisingly deep explanation for things, and really clever, really inventive. Terry Pratchett's mind, I can't even imagine what it was like to be in that guy's head. Wild, some of the things he must have come up with. Very, very creative, and I'm looking forward to seeing what other ideas he has. The amount of like little fun things he threw into just this one, and then I've got like another 40 Discworld books that I can read. Who knows what else he comes up with, but this was a very, very strong start. And like I said, I think in the context of reading other Discworld books, I could probably bump this up to 4.5 stars eventually. For now, it's just a super, super solid 4. I think the most solid 4 that I've given anything in the project so far. So this was excellent. Glad I finally read it. And it's definitely given me much more incentive to actively seek out the Discworld books now. Okay, I am back, checking in again. It's been just over a week, I think, since I last recorded anything, talking to you about Hogfather. And I've just got back from a weekend in London visiting my sister. And while I was there, I acquired the next few books in this challenge so we can crack back on. I say I can crack back on. I have cracked back on in a pretty big way. While I was there, because I was waiting to get more books for this challenge, I read The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, which was excellent. 4.5 stars. I love Leigh Bardugo's writing. Speaking of 4.5 stars, my choice for I was Isaac and the Egg by Bobby Palmer. I was nearly crying on the train, the train back from London reading this. It's so, so good. This is his debut as well. It came out a couple of years ago. I think he has since released another book, which I'm quite keen to get because I loved his writing in this one. Our main character, Isaac, you may have guessed, is a recent widower. He is in a deep depression over it. We start the book immediately just thrown right into it. He is stood on a bridge, contemplating the worst. He lets out this like big angsty scream, and something screams back from a nearby woodland. He follows the like source of this scream, and there he finds the egg, which is like this alien creature that he takes home with him. Things go from there. You know, they kind of form a bit of a bond, and you know, can the egg help Isaac through his grief? That's the big kind of like main point of the tale. It's very much a story about grief, and a bit of depression, you know, mental health, therapy, friendship, family. So some really important themes that they're exploring with this, and I think Bobby Palmer does it brilliantly. His writing's amazing. He writes in present tense, at least in this book is in present tense. I'm so used to reading books in like past tense, and I normally prefer that. So that kind of threw me off at first, but I think it's really hard to write in the present tense, but Bobby Palmer seems to do it effortlessly. It was really good, constantly engaging. This is probably the most page-turnery thing that I've read in this challenge so far. I just kept going and going and going. I read over half of it, just sat on the train back from London, and then I polished the rest off last night. It was such an easy read, in a way of like, I just found it very quick to get through rather than easy, because the subject matter, you know, can be quite deep. But it's really funny as well. I think the egg is an absolute delight of a character. Very sweet, very wholesome, very funny. But there, you know, there is kind of an element of bittersweetness and heartbreak to the plot, obviously, because Isaac's kind of grieving. My main concern when I got started was that Isaac's wife, Mary, who's the wife who passed away, I was scared she was going to fall into the trap of like so many like shows and movies and books where the dead wife is like just a 2D character. There's nothing to them. They were just there to be a plot device. But we actually really get to know Mary quite well. I think you get a really good sense of her. You know, there are a few sections where she's kind of the POV that we're getting. So you do see, you know, how she ticks, how she thinks and feels about things. So I'm glad it didn't fall into the trap of like, you know, the cardboard cutout dead wife who's just there to die. Seeing the relationship between Isaac and the egg develop across the book, I think was really well done. Again, I got quite teary on a few occasions. And yeah, it was just such an easy read and such a great kind of time just sitting on this. I think if I had any little niggles, because obviously I gave it 4.5, not a full 5, there's I don't know if it really is like an open-endedness at the end of the book or not. I think it kind of reaches a conclusion but also doesn't. I think it kind of, it's like you work out what happens with this thing. You know, you kind of leave it up to you. I kind of wish it didn't do that. I kind of wish it just stuck the landing and like committed to the story it was telling, rather than trying to like explain away things. I feel like that for me made a few aspects feel a bit less impactful than some events that happen early in the book. Be like, well, can that really have made sense if that's the case? But I think there are multiple readings to it, so you know, you can just, whatever works best for you in terms of how the things wrap up, you know, how the novel wraps up, you can just go for it. I think the last couple of chapters in particular, I think the pacing was a bit slow. I felt like the last couple of chapters were a bit overwritten, but the rest of it, pacing-wise, was brilliant. It was a really interesting kind of experience. You know, there's some, if I can try and find it, you know, I mean, there's a bit where Isaac screams, for example, and, you know, you just see the scream written out like that. I'm trying to flick through to find anything else. And here, you know, there's a few sections that I've written in the shape of an egg. So, you know, it plays around with that kind of thing. I think my favourite example of this, I probably won't be able to find it. I say that, I literally opened on the page. There's a little word search at a moment there, because they're talking about how Isaac and Mary liked to do word searches together. And that word search there, you kind of look at it, it's just kind of thrown into that chapter. You're like, okay. But if you look, you can actually find the hidden words in that word search are the stages of grief. So I thought that was a really fun kind of bit of interactivity between, you know, the reader and you know, the book itself. So there's a few fun things like that kind of really suck you into the story and get you really emotionally invested. If you weren't already, I was already pretty emotionally invested by that point. There's a sequence nearish to the start where the egg tries to make Isaac breakfast in bed. It's so funny, but also so sad, and just so sweet. So it's definitely kind of a melancholy feeling running throughout the book. There's definitely a bit of sweetness to it. There is kind of a sort of mystery as well running through it that gets paid off at the end. For me personally, I thought it was pretty obvious what it was going to be. It might surprise some. I think there was only one thing I feel like this could possibly be, and that's what it was. I don't know how I feel about that inclusion. I feel like we didn't need that. I feel like that kind of dilutes the grief storyline a bit, but it also, it's important to Isaac, so it needs to be important to us as the reader as well. So I honestly, I could have done without the plot twisty element of it nearer the end, but it's still an amazing kind of portrayal of grief, and how you try and work through that. I think it fully explores everything it kind of wants to talk about in a fantastic way. I think it's incredibly well written, especially as a debut. It's so impressive. And yeah, 4.5 stars. This is up there with Exhalation as one of my favourite things I've read so far. Obviously Exhalation was a collection of short stories, so I can say without a doubt this is the best novel that I've read in this challenge so far. Just so impressive, so page-turnery, so sad, so funny, so sweet and heartfelt. Kind of gave me everything I wanted it to be. It really lived up to what I was expecting, which I guess is kind of rare in a way. But this was great. I adored this. Would highly recommend. If you are kind of in a bit of a funny space, or you're not in the mood to, feel a bit glum at times, maybe hold off. But whenever the time is right for you, maybe do a bit of research around what it explores. There's certainly some things I would probably put trigger warnings in about, but saying them would spoil it, so I'd probably just look those up somewhere where you can find a good resource that would tell you what to expect from this if you are worried about triggers. But if you can research that and find the right time for this, I think it'll be worth your time. It was really good. It's kind of just a bizarre idea to start off with, but you get over that so quickly. And yeah, there is a nice kind of wrapping up of things, I would say. Yeah, it was just so good. One of my favourite things I've read so far, easily. So yeah, check this out if you get the opportunity to. And that brings us on to our book for Jay, which is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. This is suggested by my friend Connor. He kind of put this forward and I was like, why did I not think of that for Jay? What an idiot. I've always meant to kind of read Jurassic Park. Obviously, the film is iconic, and I'm really intrigued to see how the book kind of differs, what is in it that isn't in the movie, and what is in the movie but not in this, all that kind of jazz. That I find that quite interesting to see. For some reason I didn't expect it to be as long as it is, but that's interesting. But yeah, I've only read the kind of prequel sort of chapter at the start, which was good and interesting, kind of what you'd expect, I guess, as like a setup to something like this. So yeah, we will see how this kind of continues on. I'll try and check back in during the halfway point. Very excited though, because obviously it's kind of an iconic story, and I am very, very, very excited to give it a try, so I will check back in soon. Okay, we are checking in on Jurassic Park. I'm about halfway through. I'm on page 236. I'm really enjoying it so far. I think this is probably shaping up to be a 4-star. We'll have to see how it goes. I think it's interesting seeing the differences between the book and the film, particularly the characterization. Like, in the film, Alan Grant hates children, but he loves kids in the book. So that was a strange change they made there. And John Hammond in this is, a conniving bastard. And, he's a lot more wholesome, I think, in the film. So it's fun to see those kind of changes. And yeah, I've just gotten to the bit where kind of shit hits the fan. I will say, pacing-wise, the fact that it's taken like over 200 pages for something to happen, it's a lot of setup. There's a lot of information overload, I guess. Just constantly, every single like minor character we meet, even if like they're in like one scene or something, they get like 2 pages of backstory, and I'm like, do we need that? You know, there's a lot of like info dumpy stuff about, you know, the technology behind dinosaurs or dinosaur history and stuff, which obviously does make sense if you want to include that, but it's not even like the characters will just give this information to us as they're talking. Like, it will just outright say it in the text, and it's kind of like sometimes I'm reading a textbook rather than a novel. You know, so it's fun if you love those facts and you know you're interested in that. But I don't know if, like, do you want this to be a textbook or do you want this to be like a fictional story? I feel like it's balancing between the two, because it throws like graphs and all sorts of stuff in this. And like, for me, I'm just not taking any of that in, especially because the characters just explain the graphs anyway. I'm like, do we even need to see them then? So, you know, that side of things I'm kind of struggling with a bit. It prevents me from getting in a good flow with the book. I think normally I would have been done with this by now. But, you know, I have found myself maybe reading 20 pages or so and then putting it down for a couple of hours and coming back to it. Maybe also just because I know in general where the story's going to go, I don't feel a need to be like, oh, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? I'm sure that has something to do with it as well. But, you know, when I do read it, I'm enjoying it. But I'm not, like, desperate to, you know, get through this as quickly as possible so I can see everything that happens. I think it's just a bit talky, I guess, for my taste, and not in a character-driven way. This is very plot-driven. If you're here for plot rather than characters, this is definitely a good book for you. Because I do think a lot of the characters just kind of blend into one, because all they're ever saying is, like, dinosaur facts. So there's no real personality to most of the characters, I would say. Ian Malcolm comes across brilliantly in this. I can see why he became such a popular character in the franchise. He's definitely the funnest and has, I think, the most personality to him. We've also gotten to know Alan pretty well, and Tim, the grandson of John Hammond. The granddaughter, whose name I forget now. She's pretty bland so far, very one note. So maybe we'll get more from her later on. And Ellie, you know, we're kind of seeing her through Alan Grant's eyes rather than having her own perspective most of the time. So I'm hoping she gets a bit more to do in the second half, because, you know, we've only just gotten to the point where shit's kicking off. But I just think if it's taken over 200 pages and you're still, like, exploring the park for the first time and still giving that first initial tour, I'm like, did it need to take 200 pages to get to that point? I would argue not. I do think there's a lot in here that I don't even say it doesn't need to be in here, because, you know, it is world building, it is explanations and stuff, but also you're giving all these facts and, you know, spitting all this information about dinosaurs and stuff, but some of it, you know, isn't even factual. So it's like you're trying to be a textbook, but also, you know, the idea of, like, you know, if you're still, a T-Rex can't see you, that kind of explanation for it. You know, that's there's no proof to that actually is a thing. That's something they just made up for, you know, to get the characters out of the situation, as far as I'm aware. So it's weird that you explain so much of this dinosaur facts and then none of it's actually accurate. It feels kind of strange. But yeah, I do enjoy what I'm reading. I can see why the film cut all of that kind of technobabble out, for sure. I think that was the smart move. Because honestly, you get rid of the technobabble and all of that kind of exposition and stuff, I genuinely think there's going to be like 60, 70 pages left of the initial 200 or so I've read. But, you know, that's personal tastes, and for me, I feel like that's really killing the pacing for me, and I can't get into it, because as soon as something happens, I know they're going to introduce another character, and I'm going to have to learn about, you know, 2 pages of backstory for them, only to then never see them again. And, you know, it's that kind of thing. I wish there was a bit more action to it, and if all of this is action, then it's going to be absolutely fine if the second half of the book is action. And I'm sure that probably will be the case, because stuff is actually happening now. And, you know, I think it's kind of like the second half of the film where it gets properly dinosaur-y anyway. So, yeah, I have kind of gone about the first half of the book quite slowly, just in regards to that. I have really enjoyed it. I think it's well written. You know, I think it's very competently written. And you can tell, I think, Michael Crichton, I don't know how to pronounce his surname, sorry. I think you can tell he has a real passion for it, and he's really kind of invested in the world and the story that he's telling. I think that comes across really nicely, and that does make it an enjoyable read, even if I'm kind of like did we need that? Did we need this to happen? Like, how many scenes have we had where someone's telling John Hammond the risks and like, oh, this could go wrong, and Hammond's like, oh, it will be fine. Like, maybe 2 or 3 scenes like that to establish Hammond's character, but honestly, I've lost count of how many times that's happened. And I think, again, with the characters kind of all blending into one that I mentioned earlier, I think there's at least 3 different characters who have been introduced and described as mid-30s balding men. Like, all of them have been described in like the same way. I'm like, that doesn't help me distinguish who's who, I'm sorry. So a few things like that, but overall I think you can tell the passion that went into this, and that is definitely getting me through the more textbooky sounding sections of the book. Either way, in terms of the actual story and the book itself and the writing, I am really enjoying it, and I think it's going to start picking up now, and kind of, yeah, I'm hoping all the setup will ultimately be worth it, and I don't want to look back at it and feel like you could have cut half of that out, which is how I'm feeling right now. So I'm hoping I get in the flow of this now, but I'm still really liking it. I feel like I've come across as very negative talking about it, but you know, it's not Galapagos, so you know. But yeah, I will check back in when I'm done, and I am very much enjoying it so far, so we'll see how the second half goes. Okay, so I'm checking back in. We have finished Jurassic Park at long last. It took me just over 2 weeks to get through this, and the fact that I've read books that are longer than this in this challenge, that I read quicker, maybe gives you a bit of an impression of how I felt about this. I think I said when I was about the halfway mark, I was feeling maybe it's going to be a 4 stars. I'm actually going to put it down to a 3, I think. While I was enjoying some of what I was reading, I also was finding some of it so boring. I think that's my biggest complaint. Most of this was just a slog for me. It was just like graphs and like reading a textbook, characters giving monologue after monologue after monologue that sounds like it's just saying exactly the same thing. You know, Ian Malcolm gave the "I told you so" monologue that lasted like 2 or 3 pages multiple times. It's like, I get it, you know, I understand, and yeah, you know, just explaining all this stuff about dinosaurs that just didn't feel relevant to what was going on and what was going on with the plot. When things kind of wrap up at the end and it seems like, you know, the crisis has been averted, they then add on like an extra, like, whole little side quest of like, oh, hang on, let's just go and do this quickly for the last 20 pages. I was like, this is so unnecessary, given how they properly end, you know, and properly deal with the threat of Jurassic Park. It just felt meandering, and I was like, this is already way too long. I think that's the problem. This is, how many pages is this? It's like, yeah, 458 pages. It's 200 pages too long, I think, is the main issue. So much meandering, so much of like, oh, and this thing happens, and then this thing happens, and then this thing happens, or like, you know, this goes wrong, and this goes wrong, and this goes wrong. But it's boring. I don't understand. You're writing a book about a park full of dinosaurs, and all the threats that you're giving are like, oh, we need to turn the generators back on quickly. Not, oh, we're being attacked by dinosaurs. They seemed, you know, I don't know why it refrained from doing that more. I was like, this isn't a film or TV show. You're not restricted for what you can do with this concept, and yet you're still not, you're telling us all these dinosaur facts, but then not using the dinosaurs in the plot. Like, they'd make some cameo appearances, and when they did show up for like a proper extended big sequence, it was great, and I was really enjoying it. The sequence, it's sort of in the film as well, with the kids in the kitchen with the raptors, that's in this, and it's so good. That's probably my favourite bit of the book, even though it's like 5 or 6 pages, but it was really tense, and it was just so good. It's like, this is what I've wanted to feel like for all these like sequences in the book, and it just never gave me that as often as I would have liked. So, you know, I think if you're like a proper dinosaur nerd and you like really enjoy seeing all these graphs about them and all these facts and stuff like that, you probably would enjoy it, because it does read like a textbook at times. For me, it just bored me, and it was very repetitive. I think a lot of the characters were just kind of meh and a bit bland. And Lex, the little girl, oh my god, was I rooting for her to die. That's a horrible thing to say, but she's a fictional character in a book, so I can say it. Oh my god, I wish the dinosaurs had got her. She was so annoying. Tim, her brother, the little boy, he was probably my favourite character in the book. I really liked him. He was really resourceful, really brave, put his life on the line multiple times for his annoying bratty sister. And I know she's just a kid. I don't know how old exactly she's supposed to be in this. I feel like I liked her a lot more in the film than in the book. I think that the book, the movie even did. I think they changed some of the characters for the better. She just whines all the time, and whenever she needs to stay quiet, she just can't do what she's told, and it's so frustrating. Whenever it cut back to her doing something, I was like, I'm gonna go and do something else for a few hours and come back. And that was the trouble, some of these books, I could not put them down. This one I'd be reading in I'd read 20, 30 pages and then just have to leave it for hours and hours because, I just I'll just chip away at it instead of I have to know what happens next. Because I was getting a bit bored. And today I read about 120 pages today just to finish it, just so I could get it done. And again, there are moments of brilliance in this that I really liked. But the second half in particular for me was just a slog. It was they walk to this place. Something's gone wrong here. They just escape and then they fall asleep. And then rinse and repeat that about 5 times. When the dinosaurs are actively involved in what's going on and there's tension and people are being ripped apart, it's great. And that's what I want. But it's so bogged down in the science that I just don't think it needs. I can totally see why the film just threw all that kind of sciencey, wincy nonsense out the window. You don't need to explain it as much as you do. It's just they made some dinosaurs and put them in a park. It goes wrong. And yet they just feel the need to justify it and give every single character and every single little factoid a 5-page backstory as to why they discovered it, and it's too overwritten for my taste. There's absolutely going to be people out there who will adore this. I think I am in the minority about my enjoyment of this compared to most people. I think the film does this story much more justice, and obviously I have to be grateful to this for existing because otherwise we wouldn't have gotten the film. And I guess say what you will about the other films in the franchise. Maybe you would hold that against this book for starting that off. But I think this gets so bogged down in repetitive dialogue, repetitive sequences, bland characters, and a few moments of brilliance and some really great sequences and tension. And I think the descriptions of things at times, the descriptions of the gore in particular, I thought were really effective, and I thought Michael Crichton did that really, really well. But for the most part, I was like, I'm sorry, Michael, you clearly care about these facts a lot more than I do, and I'm falling asleep. I wish I loved this a lot more than I did, but I'm going to stick to a 3. So I just think it should have been half as long as it is. If it was half as long as it was and cut out all the faffing, this would have been amazing. And that is what the film did. It cut out all the faff, and it's an amazing, iconic film that still looks and holds up to this day. It looks good, holds up. So I appreciate that this exists. It's a brilliant idea. I don't know about the second book that he writes, if that is a bit sharper, maybe. But my God. Just... bit of a shame, but it did have some really great moments, as I said, but some of the characters just got on my nerves. A few writing choices I started noticing it, and then I could not notice it. Is the moment in How I Met Your Mother when you realise what's wrong with someone or what you don't like about them, and then it's the glass breaking sound effect and you can't unsee it. That was this with me. So many times the dialogue would be written and be blah 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 blah, so said, blah, 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 and they carry on with their sentence. But, like, they pause in such an odd place in the sentence. It just doesn't make sense. So that then they say, you know, Alan said. And it just seemed so balmy. It would be like, I was walking down, Alan said, to the beach the other day. I'm like, why are you writing it like that? Let them say the whole sentence. And yeah, it was just, I don't know. Maybe some of the writing just wasn't my style, but that, you know, there's a lot of like graphs and stuff that kind of show people on the computers like hacking the system and stuff like that, and I just wasn't taking any of that in, because it's just like, there's so much information here, I'm just going to skip it and carry on reading the actual text, because I don't think you even needed those in there. But it I don't know, I just, it feels so bloated, and yeah, that side of things wasn't for me. But, you know, I think some of the core characters like Alan, you know, Ellie was good, but I think that's because I love her in the films. She's pretty 2D in this, for the most part. Like I said, Tim, I think, was my favourite character. You know, Dennis Nedry was the arsehole you want him to be. John Hammond was a little shit in this, but I did enjoy that. You know, Dr. Henry Wu, I think has a lot more humanity to him in this, and I enjoyed seeing that. So, you know, there is some good character work in there. Most of the background characters very much were background characters and just blended into one. There just wasn't enough action, I guess, in this for me, and just too much bloating and padding and info dumping and repetitive dialogue. You know, there's only, I loved Ian Malcolm, obviously, because he's iconic, but there's only so many speeches I could take from you, buddy. Like, you were talking for like 3 or 4 pages at a time, making the same point every time. So yeah, there's just a few things, I guess, in the writing and the plotting that just frustrated me. That wasn't my favourite. Characters that drove me insane. But, you know, I think his passion for this story, Michael Crichton's passion for this, is so clear. And I really did appreciate that. I appreciate what came from this book more so than the content of the book itself. But again, when it worked, it really, really worked for me. I think sadly more of that came from like building up the characters in the first half than anything else. But yeah, it is what it is. It's a shame. So ultimately, Jurassic Park was a bit of a slog for me, but it still had, I had a decent time with it. But yeah, I had to just do it in little sections because it didn't grip me, sadly. And in the end, I read as much as I did today to get it done. So, not a glowing review, I will say. Maybe I'm sounding a bit harsher on it than I actually intend to be, but still 3 stars. I'd still say it's above average, just about above average. But I don't think I'd be rushing to read to this again. I don't think I'd be rushing to read The Lost World either. But I'm glad I finally read this, because this has been something I've wanted to read for a very long time. So I'm glad to have had it and take it, tick it off the list. But I will admit to being a bit disappointed with it. But I think I might be in the minority from what I've seen on reviews and stuff. I think a lot of people would call this an absolute classic, and all the power to them. I'm just not one of those people. I do want to shout out one of my commenters and viewers for these videos very kindly. They have bought the next 2 books for me from my Amazon wishlist, which was incredibly generous and kind of them, so thank you very, very much. It's currently Tuesday, and I believe they are due to arrive on Friday, so when those arrive I can carry on with this challenge, and I will check in with you then and talk to you about what the next book is, because we're obviously on K next. But I'll wait until I physically have it to kind of talk through it. And yeah, I will check in then. Okay, so those books have now arrived. So again, shout out to Kaz or Karen for very, very kindly purchasing those for me. And yeah, I am halfway through the first one, my choice for K, which is Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was one that always popped up when I was Googling like books beginning with K. This was kind of top of a lot of lists that I saw, and I did have one kind of loose recommendation for it, so I went for it. The premise intrigued me. In universe, there are things called AFs, or artificial friends. Klara is one of these artificial friends, so these are like androids that are purchased to, I think for the most part, keep children company. Just watch out for them, do basically what's required of them in any given household. And Klara is one such of these AFs, and she's a bit different from others because for whatever reason she's more insightful and she absorbs more information. So she's not like the newest model or anything, but she still has something that makes her stand out. So there is this girl called Josie, I believe she's 14, and she picks Klara out and wants her. So Klara comes to Josie's house and kind of moves in, and it's kind of about their relationship and a bit more than that, because Josie's actually very unwell with an illness that hasn't really been specified, but I think it's quite serious. So she goes through periods where she's quite weak and has to get a lot of rest and everything like that, so Klara kind of watches out for her and looks after her. It's Klara, Josie's mother, and the housekeeper that works at the house. So it's very limited on the characters that it focuses on. There's also Josie's next door neighbour called Rick, and Josie and Rick kind of have this plan for the future where they're gonna, make a life for themselves together. So yeah, it's very focused in that sense because there's not too many characters. The first is split into sections. I think there's 6 parts to this book. I've read the first 3. I'm on page 203 now, just over halfway through. And the first part is basically just getting to know Klara and her situation in the shop where she was purchased. So there's some other AFs there that she talks to. There's the manager of the shop, Josie coming in and kind of getting to know her and deciding she wants her. So it's that kind of deal. And then things kind of go from there in different directions, and there's tragic backstories and all sorts of stuff, which is very interesting. And then Klara has an interesting relationship with the sun. Everyone refers to the sun as a he, which I think is interesting in this universe. And Klara believes, through her observation, we don't know whether or not she's right about this. In universe, she could just be absolutely correct, or maybe it's just the sun as we know how it behaves. She believes its light has healing properties and makes people feel better. So she believes that ultimately the sun will allow Josie to feel better, and she's kind of going about trying to make that happen. If you've read anything else about an android friend, or a future where robots and humans live in harmony or stuff like that, that kind of deal, if you've read Ted Chiang or something, I don't think this is anything new. So far I don't think this has anything new to say or anything new to offer. If it's the first story of its type that you would have read, I think you'd be like, wow, this is really interesting, this is a really cool idea. But I think reading Exhalation earlier in this challenge has kind of somewhat dampened how much I would have enjoyed this, but it's fine. I think it's competently written for the most part. I think it's fairly basically written, but I'm enjoying what it's doing. I'm enjoying Klara as a voice. I'm enjoying some kind of the dynamic she has with different people and the mysteries behind some of these characters and what their motivations are, what their backstories are. It has just taken a potentially dark turn, so maybe that's going to be offering something a bit different. But so far, it's, I'd read the first section of the book, and nothing so far has kind of surprised me from there. I'm this is basically what I expected the story to be. So I am hoping something's whoa, that's, a bit different. So in terms of a story like this, I don't think it currently has anything new to say, but it's fine, it's enjoyable. The only thing I would say is, I think the ages of the kids, the ages of Josie in particular, sometimes maybe it's time passing more and more in the book than I'm aware of, but I think Josie's supposed to be 14. Sometimes she reads like she's 6 years old. Sometimes she reads like she's 35. Just some of the things she says, her language, I'm interesting. But then she'll do things I'm okay, maybe she is a child. So it's just the things she talks about sometimes, in particular with Rick. I'm kind of what's going on here? So I don't know if maybe Klara just spends years with the family at this point, and I just haven't realised how much time's passed, but it feels like it hasn't been ridiculously long. It's probably been a couple of months. So that's a bit vague. And also I think I struggle to kind of picture things with descriptions in books at the best of times, but this one's particularly vague because obviously Klara, she spent her whole life until now in the shop where she was bought, so she hasn't really experienced the outside world much. She doesn't really know how it works and how things are described. So she'll describe things, and I think it's supposed to be us as the reader know what she's talking about and what she's describing, but obviously Klara doesn't, and sometimes that's the fun of it, like, oh no, it's this, but Klara doesn't understand that. But the way Kazuo Ishiguro describes some of these things, I'm like, even I don't know what that is. Like, what the hell how am I supposed to picture something when I don't think you're really describing, even the vague description that Clara's giving of it isn't enough to tell me as the reader what it is. So I'm kind of a bit lost at times like that. It doesn't happen too often, because most of the action does just take place in Josie's house. But yeah, so I think some of the descriptions are a bit too vague for my taste out sometimes, but the main thing is I think the writing for Josie is a bit all over the place. But I am enjoying it. It's very solid. It's a reliable exploration of this concept. It's not blowing me away. I'm not disgusted with it. I really don't know what they're going to do for another half the book yet with this concept and this setup so far. So we'll see. But I am enjoying it. I'm looking forward to seeing how it's going to wrap up, and I will check back in when it's done. Okay, so a couple of hours later, and we are done with Klara and the Sun. I think my feelings basically stay the same. I think this was really solid. I really did love the way this ended. I thought the last little section was really nice. I think the messages the book was trying to get across finally kind of came together. And I think the conclusions that it draws at the end, and the conclusions some of the characters make, there's some really beautiful lines that they say. It's a really nice exploration of, living a good and full life and a meaningful life, and what that means to different people. I do think it was a bit too long. I think this would have been better as a novella rather than a full-on novel. Maybe cut like 50 pages out and just make it a bit tighter. There were a few sequences that was like, you could have trimmed that down a bit. And I think a lot of the conversations and dialogue in this the conversations just went round in circles again and again and again. But yeah, there's some really nice exploration of like belief and hope and, the idea of wishing and fighting for someone who you believe should have a good life to have a good life and a full life. The concept of the unfairness at times of, sometimes good people just aren't going to have good lives, and that sucks. And is there something you can do about that? So, in the end, I think the first half I was like, it's not really giving me anything new. There's an episode of Black Mirror that I think is basically the plot of this kind of just delves into that at times and kind of dips its toe into those waters. So it's like, there still isn't anything new. But I think the messaging at the end really does help it all come together. And I do think, I talked about a vagueness before in the descriptions. I actually think that just bleeds into the writing in general at times, which might be my biggest gripe with it. I don't know if I fully got on board with the writing. It just felt like a real disconnect. And sometimes it did feel like they were making this up as they went along in terms of writing this. At times it was just teasing like different story beats that were much more interesting than what actually happened. So it did feel a bit like I'm just writing this as I go along and hoping for the best and hoping I come to some sort of conclusion. And I think that does hold together in the end. But that's why I think, streamline it a little bit, maybe cut out some of those teases of what else might happen in the storyline, and just have it be a bit more focused in that respect, because there are a few tangents in this and a few characters that get introduced that I just feel like aren't needed, and there is one kind of side story. I mentioned Rick when I last checked in, Josie's like friend. Him and his mum kind of have a little side story to themselves in the second half of the book. And it does it acts as like a reflection of Klara and Josie's relationship and what that whole situation is. So I can see why it's there, but I do feel like it didn't need as much focus as it did get. I think some small aspects kind of overstayed its welcome that combined with the writing just feeling a bit vague, and like it just felt like it didn't really know what it was trying to say. And that's why I kind of got the impression of like, are you just writing this as you go along and just making it up and hoping? And obviously that might not just be true. That might be just an unfortunate interpretation from me. But and there's nothing wrong with that either. You know, when I'm writing things, I write as I go along. But yeah, I think, you know, just some aspects of that could have maybe been a bit neater. I think I guess what I'm trying to say is like it feels a bit non-committal at times, because it's just going all these different directions, like, oh, this might happen next, or this might happen next, and then it's like, oh, actually, now I'll do this. But you don't kind of go back and retroactively, like, remove those teases. And, you know, it does talk about pollution and stuff, and there's a little side quest regarding fighting pollution in this. But it's not... I feel like it doesn't have anything to say about pollution, other than the basic of, like, pollution's bad, we should stop that. And again, that side of things doesn't really go anywhere. So it was a lot of just throwing stuff in and I think hoping it all holds together. But, you know, there's pollution talk in this, but I don't think it's about pollution or has anything to say about pollution. So just that vagueness, I think that's what's a bit frustrating, I guess, about this. Like, I was just reading it being like, I don't really know what you're trying to say. I don't really know if you're making a point, or if you think you're making a point and I'm not getting it. Am I just a bit thick? I don't know. But then, you know, like the last 20 pages or so, it were really nice and really brought things together and, you know, made me sad to leave this story and these characters behind in the end. You know, it's a very bittersweet ending. So it does have something to say, ultimately, but I think it meanders a bit too much trying to get there, and I think maybe it thought it was going to make a different point at the end than it actually did. I guess something's up for interpretation, like the role and the relationship between Klara and the sun. She kind of worships the sun at times and kind of, you know, is looking to it for answers. And again, that's a vagueness that I think works, because there's things that happen that, like, could it be to do with this? Could it not be? Could it be a coincidence? And I like that. I like not getting answers about that. It was just some of the other things that I was like, maybe needed more clarification on. This is very much, you're being drip fed little instances about the world. You never explicitly like explain, like, this is how it works in this version of the world. It is left up to you to kind of decipher what's going on, and I think at times that's to its detriment. And I think that's never clearer than the times when it's just Klara on her own with her own thoughts, and that's all that's happening. When she has other characters to talk to and she's bouncing off other characters, I think it's a lot better. But when she's just left to her own devices and it's just like her saying, you know, I did this, I did that, that's when the vagueness kind of really comes across. And it feels like the book wants Klara to have moments of her own because she's the main character, and it feels like she should have moments where it's just her to kind of develop her character, but it also has zero ideas for what to do with Klara's character. It's a very kind of strange treatment of its main character. It almost feels like the book's kind of bored with its own narrator, which is interesting. And I don't think, that's not a criticism. I find it genuinely fascinating how this was written. And if it's just me who kind of feels that vagueness and that absence of like messaging in the writing, and is that just almost purposeful? I mean, I feel like that's incredibly hard to do on purpose, but there is also something about that idea that I think works within the concept of the book and what it's trying to say at the end, and almost like a futility of things. Some things you just can't control, some things you can't do anything about. Sometimes you're always just gonna get, you know, you're gonna draw the short straw, and some things are inevitable. So it kind of does work in that aspect. So maybe it is purposeful, and this is actually like geniusly written. And I do think the writing's good. You know, it's not my favourite thing I've ever read, but, you know, I think in the end it gets the point across that really does nail it. And I suppose if you are going to nail it, like, emotion-wise and writing-wise. I'm glad it was right at the end. I'd hate to have like a really strong beginning or a really strong middle and then the ending sucks. And that's definitely not the case with this. But yeah, I had a good time with this overall. I'd give it a 3.5 stars, a very, very solid 3.5 stars. I did enjoy it. You know, I think actually this would be interesting to read again now that you know where the story's going, now that you're a bit more familiar with the world and the vagueness of it. I actually think maybe you would, maybe earlier in the story, be like, oh, so that's actually some foreshadowing that I didn't pick up on because it was so vaguely written and explained earlier. So maybe it's something that actually you're going to get more out of if you read it and reread it. But for just the first read through, I did very much enjoy this. You know, I think I wanted it to add more to the conversation than it did. If you've seen certain episodes of Black Mirror, if you've read things of this ilk already, I don't think this is really going to give you much new, considering it's 340 pages. Maybe it's not necessarily worth that. If it ever works out for you that, you know, you find yourselves with a copy of Klara and the Sun on your lap, I wouldn't say stay away, don't read it. I think you would probably have a good time with this. I think particularly, you know, the messaging all coming together at the end did leave you on a very good note. And I do think there's some good stuff in here, but I do think it was a bit too non-committal for a bit too long. I think it unfortunately teased more interesting things that the plot could have done than it actually ends up doing. And again, the vagueness of the writing, I don't know if it's actually genius or like insane beyond comprehension that this was written in that way. I genuinely can't tell. And I guess that's a good thing, because it's gonna, you know, I think I'm going to be thinking about this for a while yet. So I think that's successful in many ways. But yeah, 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed this. I maybe have to seek out some other stuff by Kazuo Ishiguro just to see if like his writing is different with other stories. Because I looked up an interview with him, and he says that, and he openly admits to saying, I basically write the same story every time. Like, all my books are just the same story, which is quite the thing to admit. So I would be fascinated to read some of his other works, like The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go, which I know have been like critically acclaimed and won awards and stuff. Just to see how I got on with his writing in those, and if it is like just really different in this one or not. So, very fascinating author to kind of have come across with this project. And I do think the way the book was constructed is more interesting to me than the actual story of the book, which is a brand new experience that I'm not mad at. So yeah, 3.5 stars. This was a good time. So next we come on to our pick for L, which is Life of Pi by Jan Martel. Just like Jurassic Park, I've wanted to read this for ages because I love the film. And I also love tigers, so happy to experience Richard Parker again. And yeah, I can't remember too much about the story. I just remember like the ultimate point it makes at the end. I was like, holy shit, that's actually... I still think about the ending of that film all the time and like what it's trying to say and the point it's making. 'Cause it really makes you question like what you believe versus what you want to believe. Which one is more important? I'm hoping that the book leaves me in that same kind of sense of wonder. Maybe it won't because I have experienced the story in a different form already, but either way, I've really wanted to read this for a long time, so I'm very excited to get cracking, and I will check in with you when the time is right. Okay, we are checking in at the halfway mark with Life of Pi by Jan Martel. I don't know. I think this is a very slow burn, and I think, well, I'm hoping it's going to pay off ultimately. It's very, very slow paced. Like I've said, you know, we're halfway through, and we've just gotten to what's on the cover. We've just gotten to what the story is about on the blurb. So, yeah, I think there was a lot of setup that I'm not sure we needed to get, and I'm not sure we're going to get paid off. The main character is a 16-year-old called Piscine, and he goes by Pi at school and stuff to avoid bullying, because some people at his previous school bullied him because it sounded like his name was Pissing, not Piscine. So that's where like Life of Pi comes into it. And he lives in India with his parents and his older brother. They own a zoo, and through various different means, they kind of pack up all their stuff to move to Canada. On the ship on the way to Canada, the ship goes down, and it seems Piscine is left as the only survivor, other than a bunch of animals, including a tiger. So just him kind of on this like little boat trying to survive, and what's going to happen from there. But that's basically where we're at right now. It takes a very long time to get to that situation. There's a lot of just backstory that, again, I'm not sure that we need. Maybe it's all going to come and there's going to be some payoff to it ultimately. There's certainly some stuff that was set up. I'm like, okay, that needs to be in there, because, you know, there's some where it's kind of going into, you know, this is what this animal's whole deal is. This is what this animal can do. And we know, like, okay, that makes sense that they're setting that up, because we need to know what this animal's like and what it's about, what the behaviour's about, because Piscine's about to spend a lot of time in a boat with one of them. So stuff like that, I think, okay, that makes sense why it's here. I don't know, because the thing with it's like a joke, because Piscine is named after a swimming pool, like a family member's favourite swimming pool. Is like the inside joke, is that's what he's named after. You could just say that, like 2 sentences explaining that, but we have like 4 or 5 pages of him explaining the backstory of this swimming pool, and like, I don't know if we needed that. It also has, because they own a zoo, obviously, there's an entire chapter, like it's about, I think it's literally 7 pages of him, you know, Piscine, like defending zoos, and like, you know, they're not all that bad. Here's why you should love zoos, really. You know, it's not just holding animals against their will, but preventing them from being in the wild or anything like that. Because, you know, that's a debate that goes on and on and on. And he goes on defending them, and then at the very last paragraph, he's like, but, you know, I'm not defending zoos. Like, close them all down for all I care. I'm like, you've just spent 7 pages defending them, so have you just wasted my time? So it felt like it didn't want to take a stance on that, but then it also takes stances on certain religions, because Piscine actually follows, I think he's a follower of 3 different religions, and some people are like, what, you have to choose one, you can't do that. But Piscine's like, oh, why? You know, he just wants to love God, so he's, you know, following lots of different religions, and I think that's a really nice sentiment, actually. So, you know, this book has a lot to say about religion and stereotypes related to them, you know, what it means to love God, and I think, you know, Piscine kind of draws that inner strength going forward in, like, you know, his ultimate quest for survival. We'll see if that kind of comes back into play, and I'm sure it will. So all of that setup I quite liked, but a lot of this was quite overwritten, I felt, and I don't know if it's purposeful or not, in a sense, because currently, now that he's like just alone on this boat, the sentence structure's kind of completely changed, and they're quite short, snappy sentences now to kind of like keep the momentum going, keep the tension going, almost like he doesn't have the energy to say long sentences like he was doing at the beginning, and he doesn't have much time to say long descriptions of stuff. He still kind of has that, but the way the sentences are written, I think, are a lot shorter now, which I think's fun as in terms of like a writing choice. But then also there's a chapter, you know, and I'm sorry, but it was quite a boring chapter, where he just explains like the boat that he's on, like what it looks like and how it is. But I'm like, you've already been on this boat for like 50 pages and now we're just describing it. I feel like the ship has sailed on needing to know what this boat is like now. All the action on this boat has now happened, and now you're describing it. So there's a few, like, I guess structural choices that I'm a bit weirded out by. And there's a couple of chapters. There's only been like maybe, because most of the chapters are fairly short. So I'm currently on chapter 53, and there's a couple of chapters that it's like a dual timeline almost, but it's only been like 3 or 4 chapters where it's set clearly after the main events have happened. And if you've watched the film, for example, or if you've read the book already, you kind of know what that timeline is. And at first it's kind of a mystery of like, what the hell is this about? Like, what's going on? And at this point in the book, you could do, as a reader, understand, okay, that's what's happening. That's who this timeline's about. This is when it's set. This is what's going on with it. But I just feel like it doesn't need that. Or maybe start with that, do like a flashback, and then end with it again. Or just exclude it entirely. It feels unnecessarily confusing to throw in this timeline and not explicitly state for like 120 pages what the deal with it is. Especially when it's not that prevalent. Like, you're doing it maybe 3 chapters out of 53. So by the time another one of those chapters comes about, you might have forgotten that they're even doing that. So there's a few things like that I think are a bit odd. But I think my main issue so far is, when they're describing animals and stuff like that, describing like locations, it's kind of the feeling I was getting reading Jurassic Park, where it felt like I'm just reading a textbook. It feels like you're just spitting all these facts at me, and I think maybe 20% of them are actually going to be relevant by the end. So it feels like just padding for the sake of it. And that just meant the first half of this book was a real slog and just ground to a halt. And I really struggled to kind of power through that. It's definitely picking up now that stuff's actually really happening and we're getting into like the meat and potatoes of the story. But that initial like 50 pages was a struggle, and even beyond that I was like, ooh, God. It took them like 90 pages just to get on the bloody ship. So I think it definitely could have been snappier, and I say this with books most of the time, but I feel like this definitely could have been shorter. I think taking 50 pages out of this by the end will probably massively benefit it. But if all this setup does get paid off in a significant way in the second half, then I guess it's kind of worth it. But it is a very slow burn, and we'll see if that's an apt choice. But I was sadly quite bored for the first 60 pages or so. But I think what Jan Martel's trying to say about like religion and faith, that kind of thing, and that exploring that through Piscine's resilience and will to live, I'm really liking that. And when stuff actually does kick off and does happen, I think it's described pretty well. But I'm not convinced right now that the second half of this book is going to make the slog of the first half worth it. We will see. It's just started to kind of turn in my favour, but my God, it's taken me maybe what day is it? It's taken me 4 days to get to page 150, which in this project so far is very unlike me. I can normally read at least 150 pages in a day. So I've really had to push through the start of this. Hopefully it'll be worth it in the end. But yeah, I'm scared it's going to turn into a bit of a Jurassic Park situation where it was all set up for so long, like the first half, too textbooky for my liking. We'll see, but I'm willing to give the second half a real shot because it has just started to pick up. And, I think as a main character, Pi is really good and really interesting. I do like him. But yeah, I was kind of hoping that I would love this already, and I'm not right now. I'm kind of... Ironically enough, for someone who needs to be on board this ship to stay alive, I'm not currently on board with the pacing of this, but hopefully that will change. We'll see. So, kind of a start. We'll see what happens in the second half, but I will check in when this is done. Okay, I am done with Life of Pi by Jan Martel. I think this would have been so much better as a novella. I do think it's too long. Well, it's not even that it's necessarily too long. It would have been fine if it felt like stuff was happening. I think I definitely prefer this story visually as a movie. I think just being inside Piscine's head and his thoughts, rather than just like seeing the action play out, I think it's just a bit of a slog. And so much of this just felt like padding, and suddenly it's like, oh, and then, it's the end now, because I've decided it's time for the book to end. And it didn't feel like it really built up to that, it just happened. And I will say the last fifth of the book was great. I loved it. when we were kind of getting to some sort of resolution and things were actually happening. Even though within that fifth that I really enjoyed, there's like a 30-page chapter that, while it was good, you could have cut it out entirely and nothing would have changed. Because, you know, when it comes down to it, you know, people have, at the end of this, people struggle to believe Piscine's story for, I guess, obvious reasons. And I don't know if that little 30-page chapter was added in to kind of add to that. So people were like, well, that definitely didn't happen. But also, people didn't believe him even before they talked about that part of his story. So I felt like it was completely unnecessary and a bit of a weird tangent. I do remember it from the film. There are a few contradictions that I'm not sure, you know, worked necessarily for me. Because there's a point where, you know, Piscine's kind of saying, you know, I am glad that, you know, the tiger Richard Parker is here with me, even though I'm scared of him. You know, he's comforting because I'm not alone. And then not long after that, he'll be like, it's just me and Richard Parker alone in this boat. That's not a comforting thought. I'm like, nothing's happened to have changed your mind. And, you know, I don't know. Some of the chapters are really interesting. Some of them were just so dull and had nothing to say. I think that was the main thing. It was just speaking and like just an internal monologue from Pi, and he had nothing really to say. And I was like, the trouble is, the middle of this book could have been a third of the length, and I think the story would have been so much better for it, because it's just nothing. I'm sorry, I don't care what the sky looks like, and you spend an entire chapter talking about the sky. I think where it leads, and like the idea of multiple versions of the story being presented, which one do you prefer, which one do you believe, that was really interesting, and I loved the way the book ended with that kind of the conclusion that the people listening to Pi's story make and which one they choose to believe. I thought it was a really nice way of ending it, but just so much of the plotting was just so boring. That was what it came down to. I think what I've realised through reading this, and I am glad I read this, I did enjoy it overall. I'd give it 3 stars. I think what this has shown me is that I need dialogue in something like this, you know, because it's just Pi on his own in this boat with the tiger that he can't talk to. He never speaks. There's no dialogue until the very, very end, which was like my favourite part. And it you know, it's just his internal monologue and him just describing how he's going about these days and weeks. He spent like 227 days, I think, overall lost at sea. And because it's just all description and his internal thoughts, and it's not broken up by conversation, I think that's what made it feel like even more of a slog to get through, especially when what he's saying is just kind of this stream of consciousness that I feel like is trying to make a point but doesn't, and just has nothing real to actually say. It's just there. Sometimes there is a point to it, like when he's talking about religion and stuff, but a lot of the times I'm just like, this just didn't need to be here. I'm sorry it didn't. But yeah, I think with something like this, I need dialogue, and you know, obviously it's just personal taste, and there'll be some people who love this, and I think most people do really love this book, and I enjoyed it. I wanted to love it, and I didn't. But when it's like a biography or an autobiography, you know what you're kind of getting into with that. You know that's just going to be a stream of consciousness, and I think that makes sense. When it's like a fictional novel like this, it's just not for me. When I think it's just someone on their own. You know, obviously at times like that, you are going to spend some time alone with the character in their head, just reading about their internal thoughts. And that's fine and good and necessary. But an entire book of it is just not for me and not my taste. It was just a bit boring for me, sadly. But that last fifth, I really did enjoy. You know, I think some things came together really well. The idea of, you know, truth and what to believe, what not to believe, what you choose to believe, faith, religion, everything it has to say about that came together really nicely, and I really enjoyed that. And like the very last bit of the book, like the way it ends off is great, but I'm not sure it was worth the journey on this occasion, just because the journey was a bit of a slog. So that's a shame. I am a bit of a Coco the Clown. There's a author's note at the start of this. So it just opens on like an author's note. And normally, if there's an author's note, I don't read them because I'm like, oh, sometimes it's like, this is a special edition of the book. Sometimes you're like, because this is like quite old now, sometimes I'll publish these and it will be like a note from the author at the start, and they kind of assume that you've already read the book when you read those notes. I'm like, well, I don't want proper spoilers, so I'm not going to read that. So I skipped the author's note. As it turns out, it's not an author's note, it's part of the book. It's actually like setting up the novel. So when I said before, like, there's these chapters sometimes that, you don't really understand what's going on for ages, and it's just kind of there. It's actually, if you read the author's note at the start, which isn't an author's note, it's just the start of the book, which I didn't realise, then those actually would make sense to you right from the off. So ignore what I said before about being confused by that. I do think it was sort of unnecessary, because this is supposed to actually be like a novel someone's written and like presenting Pye's story. But those moments completely breaks that. Those sort of chapters, and like kind of goes against that concept. And again, there's only like 3 or 4 of chapters like that. And then it's never brought up again. It just never happens again. I thought they were going to revisit that at the end. They don't. It's just, they're gone after that. So it does like 4 or 5 chapters where it's like, after the events have happened and they're talking about things, and, read the author's note because you'll know what those things are right from the start. You won't be confused like I was. So that was my bad. But also, bit of a fault, I think, in terms of this publication of it, maybe. Because I feel like it needed to be made clearer that was actually the start of the book, rather than an author's note that I tend to skip. So that didn't help. That was on me. But, so yeah, that comment I said about being confused by those things in my last check-in, ignore that, that's wrong. Just chop like 100 pages out of the middle and you're in for a winner there. It just felt like it was either the book had decided how it feels about this topic and how it should feel about this certain theme, or it had nothing to say about a theme or a particular thing and it was just there. So I feel like it needed a better balance. But yeah, that's how I felt. I can't help that, unfortunately. But yeah, I would give it a decent 3 stars. I would probably read the beginning and the end again. I don't know if I'd probably skip through a lot of the middle portion. But when it works, it really works. I think its themes and like its message is really strong, and I think it ties up really nicely at the end. I loved the last portion of the book. I thought it ended really impactfully, and a really kind of like funny, light-hearted way of ending it. And I really enjoyed Pye as a character. I just wish the nature of the story was either much shorter or allowed him to have more of a conversation or someone else to bounce off of, which at one point does happen, and I'm like, thank God. But most of the time it's just a stream of consciousness that in a novel like this just isn't for me. I can deal with that in like an autobiography or biography or like a non-fiction book. But in fiction, I've learnt through reading this that it's not to my taste. Still love the film. I think actually seeing, things play out, and we're not just constantly hearing all these meaningless thoughts in Pye's head. That's a much better version of the story for me personally. But, a lot of people love this. I liked it. I didn't love it, sadly. But it was good. It was solid. But just way too long. And I think it feels like, maybe it thinks it's saying a lot about certain things, but it really doesn't have the substance I think it thinks it does. But yeah, its main themes and messages are really strong. The ending was great. But I think there were just some fundamental structural flaws for me in the way that this story is told, and the length for what actually happens in this story, just way too excessive. So yeah, I'm kind of a bit sad that I didn't love it, but I liked it. It was fine. Life of Fine is what I'd call it. Fine of Pye. I would read something else from Jan Martel, because I do think this was very well written, but what was actually written just didn't have anything real to say, I think, for the most part. So yeah, that was Life of Pye. It was good. I enjoyed it. 3 stars, but I think it could and probably should have been a lot better or presented in a very different format. You know, make this a novella, cut all the middle bit out. That's an easy 5 stars with its themes and messaging and everything, easily. Sadly, that's not the reality. But I am very glad I did read it, just because, you know, it's taught me something about my tastes in books, I think. And in future, if I look up something like, oh, I'm interested in this, and then I see that maybe it's just going to be a stream of consciousness, and then, like, if it's just about a character on their own, I'm probably going to know to, like, keep away from it. So I'm really glad I read this, because I've wanted to for ages, and it has taught me something. So it's a very, very worthwhile experience having read this. But yeah, the actual story, I think, just needed to be shorter, is the long and short of it. So yeah, overall, good. Thank you so much again to Karen for getting this for me, and for getting Klara on the Sun for me as well. Very kind of you. So yeah, that is our choice for L, done in the books. So we move on to our choice for M, which is going to be the last book I talk about in this video. So that's exciting that we're here. And we are talking about Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. So yeah, this is about a boy or young man? I don't know how old he is actually. Someone called Cyrus, who is an Iranian man, or maybe an Iranian boy. I'll find out how old he is when I start reading, I suppose. And yeah, I think I think he is supposed to be a bit older, because I think he's a recovering alcoholic, I think. Maybe a recovering addict. He seems to have a lot going on with, like, family history and, like, mysteries surrounding what happened to members of his family, and he's kind of dealing with that. I think he's also, you know, in a new relationship, and he's just kind of trying to find a place for himself in the world. I'm not sure exactly, like, specifics about the plot yet. I'm going to find out, because I'm going to start reading it now. But yeah, I'm excited for this one. This one got a lot of hype and a lot of praise. I will get into this now and check back in with some thoughts. Alright then, we have come to the end of our second wave of books for this challenge. We are officially halfway through Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. I didn't end up doing a check-in at the halfway mark for this one. I finished it, I just read it in a day. I was going to do a check-in, but I had hopes about this book, and I didn't want to do a check-in with those hopes, come back and be like, no, sorry, didn't work out. However, friends, it's finally happened. This is one of the best books I've ever read. This is 5 stars, the first 5 star for this challenge. This was amazing. This was written for me. Reading, like, the blurb and a few things like that, I was like, this feels like something I probably connect to. It feels like the protagonist is going through things that I relate to and I'm going through. I didn't realise just how spookily it was going to kind of fit me and how much I was going to relate to the main character in this and his struggles. This hit so hard. It was just even more than I could have possibly hoped it would be, in terms of an exploration of what it is to live a meaningful life and making your mark on the world and producing art in the world. You know, the value of yourself, the value of what you make, the value of what you do. Like, this just, it gripped me from the first page. I just couldn't put it down. I just blitzed through it. This is like 330 pages, I think, something like that. 332 pages. And I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. It's so good. I know it's got a lot of hype when it came out, I think last year. And I totally see it. I was this close to going for Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie for M, and I still do want to read that, and I'm sure I'll still really enjoy it. But I was like, I do know the twist for that, and this I would be going in, like, basically completely blind, so I'll go for this instead. I'm so glad I did. I can't express how much I love this in words. I don't think I won't be able to do it justice. It was just such a fantastic experience. If people came to me and said, I hated this, I'd totally get it. This does things that normally I don't like that books do. I feel like this sort of does things with, like, chapters and perspectives and time going a bit all over the place in terms of the perspectives and the timeline and stuff, that I think books like Life of Pi sort of did briefly. This does it more than Life of Pi does, but I think it's successful in this. And I think that comes from the context of knowing This is Kaveh Akbar's first novel that he's ever written, but he's a poet normally. He writes poems usually. Knowing that he was a poet going into this, and knowing like poems, and I'm just used to reading a poem at school or college or something and like dissecting it line by line, like what does this mean? What does the use of colour in this, stanza mean? All of that, really analysing it. This is like a really long poem that you can analyse. There are poems within this at the start of like different sections of the book, because the main character Cyrus, he's kind of working on a project that might be poetry, might be written text, he might be writing a book, and there's sections of that work that he's working on in this. So there are like poems within this that are in universe. Cyrus has written them about people that he's met that are, involved in the book that he's writing. There are like dream sequences in this. Like there's one humorous sequence right at the start, the first of many dream sequences, where Cyrus is having a dream that his deceased mother is talking to Lisa Simpson of The Simpsons fame. And I was like, that's wild. And then there's more dreams like that. There's multiple points of view. Cyrus is the main character and it's mostly following him, but you do get points of view from his mother, his father, his best friend, his uncle, and like a performance artist that he meets as well, as part of him researching this book. So there's a lot in there. It is mostly Cyrus's story, and I just think it's so beautifully done. And I don't think it's a perfect book. There are things that I could complain about with this, but the experience I had, it was just so relatable to me specifically. It feels like this was written just to appeal to me. It feels like it's a very niche person who'd be like, I can just relate to literally everything that Cyrus is talking about here. Cyrus says things in this that I'm like, I've been so afraid to say that and speak that thought. But you're absolutely right. Cyrus at one point says like, I just don't think I was built to live in this world. And I've felt that basically all my life. And the last like 3 years or so, I've definitely been struggling with that thought. Even at school, I remember thinking like, if I don't become like an actor or something like that, I really don't know what I'm going to do. I just don't think I was built to do anything else. And that is the exact struggle that he's going through in this. He's 28, turning 29, just like me. And he's just kind of having this crisis about like, if I died now, I wouldn't have an impact. I want my death to mean something. I want to have made a mark on the world. I want to make art that leaves a lasting impression. And that's all the stuff that I think. And it was crazy just being in his head and being like, yeah, absolutely. He suffers with depression, which is definitely something I've struggled with. The only thing about his character that I didn't relate to is the fact that he's a recovering alcohol and drug user. At the start of the novel, well, there's like a little prequel-y bit, but then the main crux of the novel, he's been sober for 2 years. His mother died in a plane accident. Her plane got shot down mistakenly. Like when he was really small, he never really knew her. I think he was a couple of months old, I think. And he's recently orphaned. His dad had just died as well. He's been looking for inspiration for a while for like something new to write, because he does write poems and stuff. He is a writer, or tries to be. But he doesn't really, he's just kind of floating about. His current job is, when people practicing like taking medical exams and stuff, they have to talk to like a fake patient. He is the fake patient. He gets paid to do that. So that's all he's doing at the minute. But he gets this idea for a new piece of work to write about martyrs, and not necessarily like the super famous ones, because he's like, what else is there to say about those, like Joan of Arc or something. He wants to find people to write about, to try and kind of comprehend, like, does he want to become a martyr himself? Does he feel like he's used up all the energy he can only give to the world? Should he just like tap out, but not in like a sad way? And this could be like his big masterpiece. And he finds out about this performance artist who is dying of terminal breast cancer, and she's spending her last few weeks in a museum. She's just sat there, and you can go and talk to her about death. And he's like, that's the perfect subject for my book. I can talk to her and get some some content and quotes for my book. So he goes to meet her. Things go from there. And yeah, it's just such a beautiful story. And again, I don't think it's like super perfect. The very end, there's like one chapter right at the end, unnecessary, you don't need it. And the actual ending itself, the main crux of Cyrus's story, the last like chapter with him, I have no idea what happened. It's open to interpretation for sure. It goes kind of wild. There's like a big twist at the end. I mean, I kind of guessed what it was going to be. That's not going to appeal to everyone, because I think the book's quite grounded up until this big twist. I'm like, that's a bit far-fetched, but I'll roll with it. And then at the very, very end, it's like, what on earth? But because, you know, he's a poet normally, I think this is a book you could read this again and again and like dissect different things. And I think there's a question of some points of view. Are they actually points of view from different characters, or are they extracts from Cyrus's book that he's written? Are these Cyrus's dreams? Because he says he has people that he loves in his dreams a lot of the time, like his mother. He dreams of them as a way of like getting to know them, because obviously he never knew his mother, and he never knew all these people that he admires. These artists and stuff that he admires, but he dreams about them, like meeting his dad or his mum, as a way of like getting to know them. So, you know, are some of these point of views actually that? Because there is sort of a thing where a plot revelation comes in what's supposed to be like a dream, and it turns out to be true, and like there's no way you could have possibly known that. So maybe it's not a dream, is it not? So I think there's a lot to kind of unpack with that. And I just, personally, I find that fascinating. That's going to be so frustrating for some people, and it's going to be way too kind of obtuse, potentially pretentious for some people. And again, I couldn't tell you what happens right at the end. It's definitely up to interpretation. I have a very positive reading of it, based on something that happened earlier in the book. I don't want to go too much into it because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But I think that would be quite aggravating to some people. So if people were like, this just wasn't for me, I hated it, I didn't understand it, totally get it. And I do wish it hadn't kind of taken the swings it does near the end, but it was still such an impactful story for me. I couldn't give it anything less than 5 stars. I loved this. It's not going to be for everyone. It's a very, very niche interest of mine. It just so happens to appeal so strongly to me, but I loved it. It's weird in a way because this is my favourite thing I've read so far for this challenge, and I don't know if I'd recommend it to people just because it's such a it's such a perfect combination of a main character and a plot that just speaks to me as someone with like a background in performing arts, as someone who's 28 turning 29 and has no fucking clue what I'm doing with my life, and I have no idea if I have a place in the world, and if I've just wasted my life, am I actually going to make a mark? If I'm not getting to live my dream and do what I want with my life, what's the point? That's everything he's struggling with. That's stuff I've been struggling with for like years. And yeah, it gets quite heavy at times, again, because obviously he's a recovering alcoholic and drug user. But it's also written in quite a light-hearted, beautiful way. You can really tell that Kaveh Akbar is a poet because some of the stuff he writes is so beautiful. Some of like his prose is really lovely to read. That's one of the reasons I couldn't put it down, because just every individual character has a very unique voice when you read their point of view. They don't sound the same. There was one character in particular who just the sentences were just so long because they're just spewing all of this out. Whereas with characters like Cyrus or his best friend Z, they're a bit more considered. I think you could read a lot of the extra bits and extra point of views as just padding. But for me, because it could be like part of the book about martyrs that in-universe Cyrus is writing, it might be relevant. It might not be, but I love dissecting that. This is something I really want to reread and like get a clear opinion of, a clear kind of reading of the ending. If you have read this yourself, tell me what you thought of it. I'm genuinely interested. This is a safe space. If you hated it, you can tell me. I won't judge you because I totally understand like anyone loathing this. What did you think of the ending? What's your interpretation of the very end with I won't even say what characters are at the end. There's like a coda And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the bit before the coda. There's like a chapter as a coda, and I think that was completely unnecessary, but it was still nice. But yeah, let me know your thoughts if you've read this, because man, this would be really if you're in like a book club, I think this would be a really interesting book club pick, if any book clubs are out there searching for something. But yeah, this was massive when it first came out, so I think this did win a Goodreads Choice Award last year, or maybe start of this year. I don't really know what year they vote for when, but you know. So, you know, it might have been done in book clubs to death already, who knows, but oh my god, it was so beautiful. I'm going to be thinking about this for a very long time. So yeah, just for me, wonderfully written, like just some little phrases that I was like, yeah, you write poetry, mate, I totally see that. You know, he described a character at some point as like they were fizzing like soda, and I was like, that's such a lovely way of describing how they're holding themselves. So just like everything is just so lovely. I think it also helps that I jumped into this from Life of Pi, where there's like basically no dialogue and no stuff happening. Jumping into this where there's so much dialogue and so much happening, I'm like, yes. So I think that also kind of just gave this a boost right from the off. No shade to Life of Pi. Sorry, I did like Life of Pi. But yeah, this, for me, this is a masterpiece. It's so good. What a beautiful story. A beautiful main character. A very flawed main character. I think Cyrus could at times be quite unlikable, but I just understood his plight so completely. There's really funny moments in this as well. There's a really funny kind of flashback with Cyrus and Z, kind of doing some work to like get groceries, and things escalate, and it's kind of wild and really funny. And you know, there's a love story sort of bubbling into the surface between those two as well, which I really enjoyed. You know, it's not the main focus of the book, it's not what it's about, but it is present. And yeah, it's just some really nice characters in here, some great symbolism. It's a real love letter, I think, to art, and a really cool exploration of, you know, martyrdom and living a full life, what the definition of a full life means to different people. There's a lovely quote near the end as well, when the performance artist that Cyrus meets, she talks about the idea of, you know, any art you make, even if you like paint something you're like, that's rubbish, it's still so special because that piece of art only exists because you existed at that exact moment with those exact materials that you had at your disposal. And like, it's incredible that this thing in front of you that you've made would never have existed if it weren't for these exact circumstances coming together, that you had the time and the resources, and just the thought to make it. I think that's such a lovely, very inspirational, very motivational thought. Maybe it's just recency bias, and I think maybe if I do reflect on this in like a month or two, maybe if I come back to this at the end of the challenge, maybe I will mark it down a bit, because again, the ending was a bit weird. It did take a pretty interesting swing. Maybe some of this was unnecessary and just in there for the sake of it, but I'd have to reread it to know that for sure, and even then I think I would find some meaning in it. It feels very purposeful. Even though this is a novel, it does feel like Cave has just written another one of his poems. There's a story actually in this. It was just an interlude, completely unrelated to the events of the book, but about halfway through there's an interlude, and it's like 5 or 6 pages. It's this short story about a guy who writes like a really, really long and beautiful poem, and I feel like that was Cave Akbar kind of talking about him writing this book itself, because that story is completely irrelevant to the rest of the book. It's just its own little thing, and it's never mentioned before, it's never mentioned afterwards, but to me it does feel like this book is just, he's written a really long and beautiful poem, and I think that kind of relates to that interlude. 5 stars, this was amazing, best thing I've read in this challenge so far. I just adored it. I could totally see people not liking this. It really just, it spoke to me on a surprisingly deep level, and yeah, surprisingly motivational, funny, emotional, bittersweet, weird, wacky, wonderful. So with that, we come to the end of part 2 of this A to Z reading challenge. 13 books down, 13 to go, halfway there, very exciting. So looking back on the 6 we covered in this, a couple of disappointments, and they're kind of like the ones that I read because I, love the movie, and I think the movie is the better way of telling these stories. These were both just too long. That's what it comes down to. So that's a bit of a shame. They were good. I liked them. Didn't love them. Wanted to. Hogfather I thought was really good fun. This was a 4-star. I can see myself loving this more, like even more, the more Discworld books I read. So I think this one will retroactively, like, gain another half a star, maybe even go to the full 5. We'll have to wait and see. But this was still really, really fun, and a great, strong start to this wave of books. And Klara and the Sun was also just a solid, good, fun time. And then, yeah, these two were definitely the hits of this wave. I'd group these with Exhalation by Ted Chiang in the first set of books as like the 3 really, really special finds of the challenge so far. This was just a gorgeous exploration of grief, as was this. This is sort of about grief as well. But yeah, this was something really special. So this was like 4.5 stars. This is a 5. Just, yes. What a way to end this. Compare this to how we ended the first video with Galapagos, which was an absolute flop and an awful, awful book. It wasn't awful, it was fine, but, it wasn't good. Let's just say that. To go from that to ending the second video with the best thing I've read so far. And we'll be covering 7 books in part 3, whenever that comes out. It's 2 months ago today, as I'm filming this, that I started this challenge and started reading the first book. So, that's fun. We've reached a milestone time-wise in terms of how long it's been since I started the challenge, and also a milestone because we reached the halfway mark at that point. So, will it take another 2 months to finish off the challenge? We'll have to wait and see. It depends when I get some books. But yes, 7 books in the next wave. It will be the letters N through to T. I don't currently own my choices for Q and R, but I think I've got the rest, so I can crack on straight away. Very successful, I think, this wave. I think it was like an average of 3.5 out of 5 for the first video we did, and this video I think it's like an average rating of 3.8 I wrote down here. So slightly better overall average from the books in this kind of set of them, so hopefully that will just increase the further along the alphabet we go. There's no reason why it should, but we can hope anyway. But yeah, that is going to be everything. I hope you have enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on any of these books if you read them, or if you've been inspired to read any of them from this. And I will see you when I see you.